nor is account taken of the personal and political learning that may challenge the structures and politics of neighbourhoods and nations. In a world that's in the depths of global recession, lifelong learning, increasingly constructed within a skills agenda, has been seen as a solution to unemployment, political instability, and social exclusion. Individuals are expected to develop their own lifelong learning to get themselves out of unemployment, to fill employment gaps, and to help move countries out of recession. Lifelong learning is increasingly taken as synonymous with formal, post-compulsory, and more vocational learning. The discourses and policies of lifelong learning have become ever more firmly linked to economic participation through the employment market and through the development of skills and training. With a policy focus on skills development for the workforce and greater participation from employers in determining learning opportunities and directions. The development of human capital becomes a responsibility of individuals on whom it is incumbent to find, recognise and develop the learning opportunities which will enable them to take their place in a working society, though the types of opportunities are selective and hierarchical. There's a call for apparently economically valuable skills to be developed and delivered through a demand-led approach, facilitated by a new culture of learning and an appetite for improved skills amongst individuals and employers. But in a gendered, classed and racialised labour market, the acquisition of economically valuable skills is no guarantee of an economically valuable job. In addition, economically valuable skills are narrowly defined. It seems to mean the development of specific skills for specific markets without recognition of the value of different types of skills for the economy, including the key transferable skills that are developed through lifelong learning. Neither is there an understanding that the economy is sustained by much of the caring and voluntary work that takes place outside of the labour market, most commonly by women. The workplace, education, training and interpretations of skills are all highly gendered, as well as being determined by social class and socio-economic backgrounds. There are increasing demands that lifelong learning should enable the development, upskilling and retention of the current workforce, leading to more flexible employees. Clearly, flexibility will be of some benefit to the workforce, giving greater opportunities for employment in changing markets. But to stay continually flexible also means having to accept short-term contracts, less job security, as well as having to be prepared to continually upskill, meaning that existing skills are eternally in deficit. Yet for many of us, the employment available to us is determined by factors which have nothing to do with the acquisition of skills, including our gender, race, socio-economic background and age. As for many people in employment, the work they do is poorly paid, unrewarding and exploitative. Working class men are still disproportionately affected by long-term unemployment. Although not so affected by unemployment, women still earn less than men, are more likely to be in part-time, non-secure and hourly paid work, are less likely to have work-related pensions or other benefits, and are less likely to reach senior management positions. Furthermore, the economy is conceptualised purely with regard to paid work. A concentration on employment and training excludes those whose contribution to the labour market is unrecognised or whose skills remain devalued, including home workers and carers, volunteer workers, unemployed people or older people. The excluded are those who are defined as non-economically active. What's emerging is a gendered and class-based skills-driven agenda for lifelong learning, which is more about learning to take our place as neoliberal subjects than about radicalisation as empowered members of local, national and global communities. However, resistances to the status quo are possible and must be deliberate in the effort to make transformative changes. By resistances, I mean counter-hegemonic practices that operate at the micro level of everyday experience and attempt, either consciously or unconsciously, to challenge and subvert hegemonic regimes of truth and privileged discourses and identities. Resistances are not necessarily, or even usually, large and dramatic acts. They are often subtle and implicit and take place in everyday routine practices. They are embedded in relations of power, as I'll go on to show. In exploring power, I argue that gender, class, and other inequalities still matter, although this is still recognised in some of the practices named as lifelong learning. As Michelle Foucault has shown, power and knowledge are inextricably linked. Power produces knowledge, and power and knowledge directly imply one another. Legitimated knowledge is persistently constructed as neutral, objective, apolitical, and value-free. However, what counts as knowledge is always intricately bound to the power relations of class, gender, and race. The lack of recognition that knowledge is socially constructed and contextualised exacerbates cultural, material, and discursive inequalities which remain embedded in lifelong learning policies and practices. Discourses of lifelong learning, for example, institutionalise and regulate gendered and normalised understandings about what learning is and who counts as a learner. I point, as way of example, to current discourse about lifelong learning and the development of social capital, which is shown as a universal good. Discourses of lifelong learning highlight ways in which learning helps to interweave diverse sets of relationships and develop the capacity for reciprocal trust, cooperation, and active citizenship. In other words, the development of social capital. However, social capital can be used to exclude as well as include. I've written elsewhere about definitions of social capital and the lack of value that is placed on the social capital that's developed, for example, by women working in the home or the community. Being included or excluded from any particular network can be partly determined by a sense of personal identity, including constructions of gender and social class. Identities and sense of self are formed through social practices and are tied both to social inequalities and discursive and cultural recognitions and misrecognitions. Theories of identity are important for examining how identifications are understood and performed discursively as well as in practice. Constructions of identity, including working class identities, remain central to how learning opportunities are negotiated. We all have to recognise something of ourselves in current or future possibilities, and a sense of who we are or who we are not can further exclude us from places where we perceive ourselves to be already excluded. Universities and other institutions of learning continue to be seen as not for the likes of us, and working class identities are not associated with academic success. The discourses that surround issues of tackling social exclusion often link not to poverty, but to raising or changing working class aspirations or attitudes. It may well be that some working class people view themselves as not good enough and believe that they know their limits in relation to post-compulsory educational routes. However, these views are constructed and compounded by complex social, structural and institutional factors. Located within discourses of personal choice and agency, structural inequalities and exclusions are often ignored. Although there may well be a lack of appetite for improved skills, this is located in the material realities of people's lives. All too often, working class identities are seen as in deficit, although deficit itself is, of course, constructed. Foucault demonstrates that power can be productive as well as coercive, and I'm not arguing here that we don't positively exercise agency in the choices that we make and the decisions that we reach. However, agency does not exist outside of our unconscious or subconscious subjectivities, nor does it exist outside of the material conditions of our lives. Whilst lifelong learning can and does open up possibilities, for some the possibilities are greater than for others. There are, for example, very many talented and qualified working class people who are denied places at more elite universities, which remain dominated by largely middle class groups, ensuring the reproduction of privilege. Women are now taking their places in universities and colleges in equal or above equal numbers to men, although this is experienced as a problem rather than a celebration of redressing the balance for women, and has led to questions being asked about whether women are taking over the academy. The growing dominance of female students in British universities, for example, has been described as one of the biggest problems facing higher education, a success story that has gone wrong. Women, though, are still more likely than men to be studying part-time, are still primarily located in specific subjects and disciplines, and are less likely to be represented at higher levels. However, explanations are likely to be located at the lack of ambition of individuals rather than the structural and discursive inequalities. Neoliberalism states that the rights of individual freedoms supersede state intervention, and the government should not therefore inhibit free trade and free enterprise. For lifelong learning, this results in an emphasis both on market forces and on individualism. However, apparent non-intervention is an ideological position, which in fact stems from political decisions and interventions and results in hierarchies of learning. For example, the hierarchies of learning that currently exist have seen cuts in funding for community, adult and continuing education, and now for HE and for lifelong learning in its broadest sense, with resources being directed instead to learning that focuses on those supposedly economically valuable skills. States foster conditions where active engagement in lifelong learning is narrowly defined, with a flexible worker-learner located in a work ethics of neoliberalism. Paulo Freire describes neoliberalism as the transference of knowledge for industrial productivity. He argues that education has come to be about technical knowledge, training learners in skills which enable them to adapt to economic globalization, but leaving little space for utopian dreams. The more education becomes empty of dreams to fight for, the more the emptiness left by those dreams becomes filled with technique, until the moment comes when education becomes reduced to that. Then education becomes pure training, it becomes pure transfer of content, almost like the training of animals. It's a mere exercise in adaptation to the world. When education and knowledge are described purely in terms of technology and training, then, as Freire has shown, in a post-modernity touched at every moment by technological advances, new pedagogical proposals become necessary, indispensable, and urgent. Although governments may introduce policies and funding councils implement them, it is in part through pedagogic challenges that innovations can be developed, resistances can be played out, and power exercised. And it's to those pedagogic proposals to which I now turn.